It was the silence that woke me. Not a sound, no hum from the refrigerator, no whisper of the furnace, no distant sigh of traffic from the interstate 2 miles away. Absolute, total, dead auditory space, silence. The digital clock on my nightstand was a dark square. A power cut, I reasoned, swinging my legs out of bed. But the silence felt thicker than that. It felt deliberate. I shuffled to the window, my bare feet cold on the oak floor. The moon was full, casting a clinical blue-white light over our suburban backyard. The swing set stood still. The neighbor's roof was a stark, geometric cutout against the sky. Everything was in its place, yet utterly wrong. No crickets, no rustle of night creatures. As if the world had been wrapped in soundproof padding. I went downstairs. The creak of the third step, abnormally loud. A gunshot in the hush. The house was Mina, 3-bedroom colonial I'd bought after the divorce, a symbol of my fresh start. Now it felt like a diorama. I checked my phone on the kitchen counter. No service, not even an emergency signal, just a hollow icon with a line through it. I opened the back door. The air outside was perfectly still, room temperature, and carried no scent, no cut grass, no damp earth, nothing. It was like breathing inert gas. I stepped onto the deck, and my skin prickled. The silence wasn't just an absence of noise. It was a presence, a heavy, listening quality. That's when I saw the first figure. It stood at the very edge of the tree line, where our property met a small patch of woods. It was tall, too tall, and thin. In the moonlight, it looked like a vertical crack. In reality, a man-shaped slab of deeper darkness. It was perfectly still. Not a statue. Statues have a solidity. This seemed to waver, like a heat shimmer, though the night was cool. My breath hitched. I blinked hard. A trick of the shadows. A leftover from a nightmare. But when I opened my eyes, it was still there. And it was closer. Not by moving, but by simply being closer, as if it had always been at that midpoint between the trees and the lawn. Its head was slightly tilted, as though observing a curious insect. I stumbled back inside, locking the door, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Get a grip, you're imagining things. Stress, lack of sleep. I leaned against the fridge, waiting for the familiar hum to return, for the clock on the microwave to blink back to life. Nothing. I went to the front window, peering through the blinds. The street was a tableau of silent houses under the moon, and in every yard, at every property line, stood a figure. Same impossible height, same unsettling thinness, one per house. Some in driveways, some on sidewalks, all just standing, tilted heads aimed at the sleeping homes. A silent, distributed audience. A cold, logical terror began to seep into my bones. This was not a ghost. This was a system failure. A rule set change. I saw movement 3 houses down. Mr. Henderson's porch light flickered on Howe with no power, and his front door opened. He walked out in his bathrobe, his steps slow and dreamlike. The figure at the edge of his lawn didn't move. Mr. Henderson walked down his path, onto the sidewalk, and stopped before the entity. For a long minute, they simply stood, facing each other. Then Mr. Henderson's body went rigid. He fell straight back, like a felled tree, and hit the pavement with a wet thud I shouldn't have been able to hear, but did a single, stark sound in the vacuum. The figure then stepped over his body, and with a slow, utterly smooth motion, glided up the walk and into the open doorway of the Henderson house. The porch light went out. I vomited quietly into the kitchen sink. This was the procedure. The silence was the preparation. The figures were the operatives, and we were the subjects. My mind, scrabbling for reason, landed on the only analogy that fit. We were being audited. Asterisk. I ran to the landline phone. Dead silence. I considered screaming, breaking a window, but the absolute quiet felt like a warning. Sound was a trigger. Movement might be a trigger. The thing in my backyard had seen me. It knew I was awake. I had broken protocol. Asterisk. I crawled to the living room, keeping below the windowsills. Through a gap in the blinds, I watched. Another porch light 2 streets over. Another door opening. Another sleepwalker meeting their auditor and collapsing. Another figure entering a home. It was efficient, methodical. There was no malice, no frenzy. It was worse than that. It was administrative. Asterisk. My own auditor was still in the backyard. I could feel its patient, inhuman attention fixed on the house. On me, it was waiting for something. For me to come out, for me to fall asleep. The rules were unknown. Asterisk. I formulated a desperate, stupid plan. I had to see it up close. I had to understand what it wanted. Maybe there was a logic to it, a loophole. Maybe it only took those who presented themselves. If I stayed inside, perfectly quiet, perhaps it would move on. But even as I thought it, I knew it wouldn't. I had been seen. My file was open. Asterisk. I crept to the back door again, kneeling to look through the keyhole. It was there, now at the foot of my deck stairs. I could see more detail. It wore something like a dark, form-fitting suit, but the material seemed to drink the moonlight. Its face was smooth and blank, save for 2 shallow depressions where eyes might be. No nose, no mouth. It wasn't breathing. It was just processing. Asterisk then. Its head straightened from its tilt. The audit was concluding. It took a step forward, onto the first stair. Its foot made no sound on the weathered wood. It was coming in. Asterisk. Panic, pure and electric, dissolved my fear. I scrambled away from the door. The basement. It was the only place with no windows, a solid bulkhead door. I yanked open the basement door, plunged into the deeper darkness, and pulled it shut behind me, fumbling for the bolt. It slid home with a solid clunk. Asterisk. I sat on the top step, breathing in the smell of laundry and concrete. The silence was down here too, but it was a different silence, an expected, contained one. I strained my ears. Nothing from upstairs. Asterisk. Had it come in? Was it moving through my living room right now, examining my books, my half-finished coffee, the photos of a life it was about to close the book on? Asterisk. Minutes bled into an hour. The terror became a numb, cold weight. I must have dozed, sitting on those hard steps, because the next thing I knew, I was jolted awake by a sound. Tick. It was the old analog clock on my basement wall, a relic from the previous owner. Its battery-powered second hand had just moved. Tick. Then again, tick. Asterisk. The silence was breaking, not with noise from outside, but from within. The clock was counting. A wave of dizzying, irrational hope washed over me. The audit was over. The system was coming back online. I had hidden. I had passed asterisk. I stood, my joints screaming, and slowly, quietly, unbolted the basement door. I pushed it open a crack. Gray pre-dawn light filtered through the house. The digital clocks were still dark, but the oppressive, listening silence was gone. I could hear the faint, blessed murmur of the interstate. Asterisk, I walked through my home. Everything was in order. The back door was still locked. Nothing was disturbed. I went to the front window. The street was empty. No figures, no bodies. Mr. Henderson's form was gone from his sidewalk. A normal Tuesday morning was beginning. Asterisk, I wept with relief. It was over. A collective nightmare. A mass hallucination. Something in the water. I would call in sick. I would drive to the city. I would be around people. Asterisk, I made coffee, my hands shaking. The power was still out, but the gas stove worked. The mundane ritual grounded me. I took my mug to the back door, needing to see the ordinary world. I unlocked it and stepped onto the deck. Asterisk, the morning air was fresh, carrying the smell of dew. Birds were tentatively chirping. I breathed it in, a survivor. Asterisk, on the smooth, weathered wood of the deck railing directly in front of me. It was a small, neat stack of 3 stones. They were jet black, smoother than river stone, and cold to the touch when I picked one up. They had not been there last night. Asterisk, I dropped the stone as if burned. My eyes darted to the tree line. It was empty. But as I looked down at my own yard, I saw them. Dozens of them. Little stacks of 3 black stones. One at the base of the swing set. One beside the garden hose reel. One on each step leading down from the deck. They were markers, tags. A soft, electronic beep came from inside. Then another. The clocks were resetting, flashing 12 o'clock. The refrigerator shuddered and began to hum. Asterisk, the system was back. But it hadn't moved on. It had left a notation, a receipt. I was not deleted. I was filed. Asterisk now. I hear the silence gathering at the edges of the day. I see people going about their business, but their eyes are hollow, as if part of them never came back from that night. I find the stones in new places, sometimes on my car dashboard, in my office drawer, on my pillow. They are always cold. Asterisk, the audit is not an event. It is an ongoing process. And my case remains open. They are waiting. They have all the time in the world, and the silence is their domain. I sleep with the lights on now, and I never, ever look at the tree line after dark. I just wait, listening for the silence to become complete again, knowing that when it does, they will be back. And next time, they won't just be taking notes. The first creak of the floorboard outside my bedroom door was so soft I convinced myself it was the house settling. It was 3:17 a.m. The silence that followed was thick, a held breath in the dark. I lay perfectly still, the familiar landscape of my ceiling taking on a sinister, looming quality. Asterisk, the second creak was definitive. A slow, deliberate compression of aged oak right at the threshold. My hand, slick with sweat, crept toward my phone on the nightstand. The cold light of the screen was a shock to the darkness. No new notifications, no missed calls, just the time glowing 3:18 a.m. Asterisk, I strained my ears, filtering out the thud of my own heart. There was a new sound, now, a subtle, rhythmic whisper. She, like someone very patiently polishing glass. It was coming from just behind the door. Asterisk logic, that flimsy shield, offered explanations. The wind through a loose window pane, the old pipes murmuring. But the wind wasn't blowing, and the sound was too localized, too consistent. It was the sound of effort. Controlled, patient effort. Asterisk, my door has a small, quarter-sized knot in the wood, right at eye level, if you're kneeling. A flaw I'd always meant to fill. As I stared, paralyzed, I saw the faintest change in the darkness of that tiny hole. A deeper blackness occluded it, then cleared, then occluded again, rhythmic, synchronized with the SHH sound. Asterisk, someone was on the other side of my door, kneeling, peering through that knothole. And they were breathing on it, slowly, steadily, fogging the wood before polishing it clear with a cloth to maintain their view. SHH. Asterisk, terror is not a scream. It's a vacuum. It sucked the air from my lungs and the warmth from my blood. I was a specimen under a microscope, pinned to the bed. The digital clock flipped to 3:19. The polishing stopped. A new sound began. A faint, dry scrape, metallic. I watched, utterly helpless, as the doorknob began to turn. Not the frantic jiggling of an intruder, but the smooth, confident rotation of someone who had all the time in the world. The latch clicked free, with a sound like a bone-snapping dot. Asterisk, the door did not swing open. It drifted inward, an inch at a time, revealing a slice of profound hallway darkness. No silhouette, no outline, just an absence. Asterisk, from that absence, a smell arrived. It was the scent of ozone after a lightning strike, mixed with the damp, earthy decay of turned soil and something cloyingly sweet, like rotten marzipan. It coated the back of my throat. Asterisk, a foot entered the room, bare, pale, and caked with dried mud. It placed itself on the floorboards with unnatural care, avoiding the known squeaky board I always avoided. Then the other foot followed. They stood just inside my room, a statue of shadow and implication. Asterisk, my eyes had adjusted just enough to see the shape of it. Tall, unnaturally so, its head tilted at an angle that suggested a broken neck. It didn't move toward the bed. It simply stood, observing. I could feel its attention like a physical pressure on my skin. Asterisk, then it spoke. Its voice was not a voice. It was the sound of many whispers, extracted from a crowd, filtered through static, and played backwards. It was layered, dissonant, and it seemed to come from everywhere in the room at once. Asterisk, we've been waiting for you to be still, it whispered dash, not dash, whispered dot asterisk, my bladder let go. The warmth spread across the sheets was a horrifying humiliation, a primal admission of defeat. The thing's head tilted further. Asterisk, you hear the house settle, it continued, the words slithering into my ears. You hear the pipes. You are so good at explaining us away, but you never ask why the house settles in that one spot, outside your door. Every night, you never ask what might be moving in the pipes. Asterisk, it took a step closer. The sweet rotten smell intensified. Asterisk, we are in the explanations, it said. We are the creak you dismiss, the shadow you blink away, the wrong number that calls just once. We live in the space between your perception and your reason, and we are so very hungry for the moment you run out of reasons. Asterisk, it was beside my bed now. I could see the texture of its skin. Not skin at all, but something like parchment stretched over jagged, misaligned bone. Its face was a study in wrongness features, slightly off-center eyes, too far apart, a mouth that didn't move when it spoke. Asterisk, tonight, it breathed. The ozone smell washing over me. You have no more reasons. Asterisk, a long, cold finger, jointed in too many places, extended toward my forehead. I knew with absolute certainty that if it touched me, I would not die. I would become part of the explanation. I would be the next inexplicable draft in someone else's room, the next unexplained stain on the ceiling. A story told to dismiss fear, not to invoke it. Asterisk, survival, in its final, desperate act, is not about courage. It's about a deeper, older instinct, sabotage. If I could not save my mind, I would break the lens through which it was being observed. Asterisk, with a guttural sound I didn't recognize as my own. I threw myself not away from the creature, but toward my nightstand. My hand closed not around my phone, but around a heavy ceramic water glass. The entity recoiled, not in fear, but in mild, curious surprise, the reaction of a scientist observing an unexpected variable. Asterisk, I didn't aim for it. I aimed for my own reflection in the dark window across the room. Asterisk, I hurled the glass with all my strength. Asterisk, the crash was catastrophic. A stunning explosion of noise and glittering shards in the moonlight. For a fraction of a second, the entity's form wavered, like a projection on smoke. Its horrific face flickered, and in that flicker, I saw something else, a chaotic mosaic of stolen glances, half-formed nightmares, and the silent screams of 100 dismissed terrors. Its power was in its patient, silent observation. The violent, senseless shattering of my own window was an act of irrationality it could not immediately categorize. Asterisk, it hissed, a sound like steam escaping a grave. The pressure in the room lessened. The darkness seemed to pull back toward the doorway, coalescing around the tall, broken silhouette, not as a threat, but as a simple, cold fact. You will tell yourself it was the wind, a bird, anything but us. Asterisk, and then it was gone. Not vanishing, but unfolding backward into the hallway shadows, becoming one with them, becoming the plausible explanation for the shattered glass already forming in my mind. Asterisk, the room was empty. Just me, the stink of my own fear, the glitter of broken window pane on the floor, and the biting cold of the night air rushing in. Asterisk, I did not sleep again. I sat until dawn, watching the hole in my door, waiting for the deep blackness to occlude it once more. It never did. Asterisk, the police came when I called about a break-in. They were polite, thorough, and utterly convinced of nothing. No forced entry but the broken window from the inside, no footprints but my own in the garden mud. They suggested a stress-induced episode, a night terror. I nodded. It was easier. Asterisk, I had the window repaired. I filled the knothole in the door with wood putty. I checked the locks 7 times before bed. Asterisk, but sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear the house settle. And now I ask why. Asterisk, I lie very, very still, and I listen past the creak. I listen for the soft, patient, rhythmic sound of breathing. She. And in the new, seamless patch on my door, I sometimes imagine I see a darker spot, a flaw in the filler, slowly beginning to form. A new eye hole, worn through by patient, observant darkness, waiting for me to forget, waiting for me to explain it away. I never will. But I know, with a certainty that chills me deeper than any ghost story, that they are in the explanations, and they are always, always hungry. In the summer of 1993, I took a contract to digitize the medical records of the old Ravenswood Sanatorium. The building was a hulking Edwardian brick structure, slated for demolition in the autumn. My job was simple: verify the file, scan it, log it, and box it for shredding. The company provided a powerful laptop, a bulky scanner, and a generous per diem for working odd hours. I was a night person, and the silence appealed to me. The records room was in the basement. A single flickering fluorescent tube illuminated a vast cavern of steel shelves, each groaning under the weight of thousands of buff-colored folders. The air was a permanent 55 degrees, smelling of damp paper, dust, and something underneath, a faint, sweetish odor like spoiled milk and iodine. I set up my station by the door, the only exit beneath the light. The first week was uneventful. I fell into a rhythm. The rustle of paper, the hum of the scanner, the soft click of keys. I rarely glanced at the diagnoses. They were grim chronicles of a bygone era's psychiatry. But the summaries were sometimes unavoidable. Patient 4478, chronic catatonia, believed Patient 5211, persistent somnambulism with violent episodes. Patient 6099, profound thermoregulatory failure. Subject's body temperature consistently recorded at 88 degrees Fahrenheit. On the 9th night, the silence changed. It wasn't broken by a sound, but thickened. The constant, almost imperceptible hum of the city vanished, replaced by a dead-air vacuum. I paused, listening. From deep within the shelves, I heard a slow, deliberate shuffle. A foot dragging on concrete. My breath hitched. "Security," I called out. My voice was swallowed whole by the darkness. The shuffling stopped. I told myself it was pipes settling stone, my imagination fueled by the macabre histories in my hands. I resumed work, forcing my eyes onto the next file. Patient 6822, Eleanor Vance, admitted 1947, primary complaint: auditory and tactile hallucinations of a presence she called the Cold Man. Notes described her as highly suggestible, treatment-resistant. The final entry, dated October 31st, 1951, read: subject found deceased in her room. Cause: cardiac arrest. Remarkable hypothermia noted, despite ambient warmth. Personal effects: one wool coat missing. A wave of cold air passed over me, lifting the hairs on my neck. It wasn't the basement's chill. This was a focused, piercing cold, like the heart of a winter gust. The scanner light blinked off. My laptop screen dimmed, the battery icon plummeting to 0, and died. The overhead light buzzed violently and went out. Panic, sharp and metallic, flooded my mouth. I was in absolute, suffocating blackness. I fumbled for my flashlight, thumbed the switch. Nothing. The batteries, fresh that afternoon, were dead. In the void, the shuffling began again, closer now, a slow, scraping gait, moving from the back of the room toward my station. I froze, my mind screaming. It's not real. It's the stress, the isolation. But the cold was real. It deepened with each dragging step, seeping through my jacket, biting at my skin. I could see my own breath now, pluming in a thin, sickly light that had no source. It was a gray, phosphorescent glow that seemed to bleed from the shelves themselves, outlining the narrow corridors between them. The shuffling was at the end of my row. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The cold became agony. It felt like needles of ice forming in my joints, in the marrow of my bones. I couldn't run. The exit was 3 feet away, but the thing was between me and the door. I could sense it more than see it, a denser patch of gloom in the gray light, man-shaped but wrong, its outline blurring and swimming like a heat haze in reverse. It stopped at the first shelf, right beside patient 6822's file, which lay open on my desk. A long, silent pause. Then a sound. Not a breath, but an inhalation of absence, a vacuum pulling at the very air. The pages of Eleanor Vance's file turned, one by one, as if by an unseen, freezing hand. A thought, clear and desperate, cut through my terror. The final note. Personal effects. 1 wool coat missing. My voice was a shattered thing. Eleanor. The shuffling ceased. The oppressive cold seemed to hesitate. It's not yours, I whispered, the words tearing from my frozen throat. The coat. It's not yours. The gray light pulsed. The dark shape shifted. For a second, I saw not a monster, but an outline of profound emptiness, a human-shaped void of pure cold and despair. The dragging steps moved again, but past me. I felt the glacial air brush my cheek as it passed, so cold it burned. It stopped at the corner of the room, where a single ancient coat hook protruded from the wall. From the shadows there, something long and dark and fabric-like detached itself and fell to the floor with a soft, dusty sigh. The instant it hit the concrete, the temperature began to rise. The emergency lights flickered on with a sudden, blinding flare. I gasped, shielding my eyes. When I looked, the corner was empty. Only a small, shapeless pile of moth-eaten wool dust lay on the floor. I didn't stay to scan another page. I left everything, the laptop, the scanner, the open files. I called my supervisor at dawn and quit. The demolition went ahead as scheduled that September. I read about it in the paper. They found nothing unusual in the foundations, the article said. But I still feel the cold sometimes. On the warmest summer nights, or in a crowded, heated room, a sudden, localized chill will wrap around me, lingering for just a moment before it's gone. And in that moment, I don't feel fear anymore. I feel a profound, weary sadness and a gratitude that is almost like grief, because I know it's just a reminder, a thank you, for letting her finally give back the coat that was never hers to take.